everybody, this is Brandon back with a third module. In this module we're going to go over the how to do editing notes and the core concepts involved in that process. So there's a few files that you have to be cognizant of to start off. The first is that you're going to need your analysis guide open so you can draw from a time to open your file. The second is that you're going to need your editing notes up and that you'll have your legend down here to draw from. You'll always want to copy and paste these, as you'll see when I'm actually conducting the editing process. So the first thing we're going to do is look at the concept of an endpoint. To do this, we're going to draw from our file. I've already set up my file. I've got my start time taken from the analysis guide, the analysis guide right here, as you can see. So we're going to go ahead and look at this. First we're going to look at our calibration settings. I've got that taken care of as well. And we'll draw from our editing notes. Just want to double check. Okay. So we'll go ahead and analyze this. You'll note that the EKG is not inverted. You can click on no. And then we're going to skip ahead to the pertinent segments. And I know that segment 25 is going to have a great example of endpoints for us. So by going into this, you can see that there are a few things going on. The first is that you have a blue marker here with a yellow star. You have a blue marker over here that doesn't seem to correspond to an R spike. And then you have 3 points here. We're going to ignore these 3 stars here. This is just natural physiology or natural physiological variability, also known as ectopic beats. Right here in the course of the analysis. So we don't really need to worry about this for the time being. We're just going to worry about our endpoints. So there are 2 endpoints here, and we're going to want to get rid of both of them. So what we'll do is we'll draw from our zooming tool. Again, I typically use this one. So we'll just zoom in, and we can see here that that does not correspond to an R spike. Essentially why this occurs is that the algorithm misreads this as an R spike and tries to designate it as that. Obviously it's not, and this is the main portion of your job is just to get rid of these endpoints. You can do that by clicking on F1 or delete, clicking on the crossbar, and then just getting rid of that by clicking on it. You'll press OK, and you'll note that the IBI channel flattens out, showing that you've fixed that problem. We'll go ahead and take a look at the one on the other side here. We'll see that basically what happened in this case is that a QRS complex was going along, and then our analysis procedure cut off that R spike. We don't want to take any chances that it could misinterpret what that R spike is and then mess with our RSA, so we'll simply delete it and press OK. You'll note that the IBI channel flattened out over here. So what we'll do for the time being is we're going to mark this process. Typically what you do is if you were conducting E1, section 01, and that was the first segment, for instance, you'd want to write that down in the proper channel or the proper marking spot. Here we'll just assume that's the case. What you want to do is copy and paste this. So click on the exact endpoint spot like this. Copy, Control C, for those of you not familiar with PCs, and then you'll just click on this file and paste it in there with Control V. Okay, you can center this if it doesn't automatically do it, but you'll just put that in there. And in this case, you'll actually want to mark 2 endpoints because we deleted 2. So going back to this, you can see that the 2 endpoints is pertinent because we had endpoints at the beginning and the end of the segment. All right, so we've got endpoints taken care of. The next idea that we want to look at is our mid-beats. I know this is the case, or I know that there is a mid-beat in here in section 46. So go and take a look at this. So in this segment, we see that there are a number of yellow stars again. We're going to ignore these as natural physiological variability and just take a look at this one right here. You can see that that is there's something wrong there because when the IBI, or when you look at the IBI channel, you see an abrupt point. Okay, again, we're going to go ahead and zoom in on that process. Just zoom in here, and you see that this there's no data there. The reason why this is the case is simply because when you're collecting the data, one of the machines is trying to talk to the other one. And it doesn't always do this properly. Basically, it's like when a boyfriend ignores his girlfriend or something along those lines. So you get this packet, what we call a packet drop. It's just a miscommunication between the machines. So what we'll do is we'll basically zoom in on this process, okay, and then we'll make adjustments to our cursors. What these cursors are these blue lines right here. You can move them around by clicking on your crossbar, and then just grabbing them and moving them back and forth. So you move them always to the outsides of where you want to mark your mid-beat, okay? And what this is going to do is going to mark a spot right here in the middle. Okay, so there's two things going on here. One is that will always correspond to the direct point in between the markers on the outside. So these two yellow stars mark the R spikes on the outside, and it'll impute a mid-beat right in the middle of that of these two R spikes. The other thing that's going on is that you'll notice that it'll mismark on the y-axis. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do this. Oops. Okay, so that said, it kind of warns against me making too many assumptions here. So you'll see that it marked this point right here. The reason it did so is because we have these options set up here, snap to peak and mid-beat auto peak. Both of these are on. So basically what it's doing is automatically latching onto the highest spike between these. In some cases, that may be the proper R spike. However, we never want to take a chance with that. We're always going to turn these off when we mid-beat. Always. So now that we've got this turned off, we'll go ahead and mid-beat, and you'll see that it mid-beated right here. So again, it's right in the middle on the x-axis. However, it's somewhat off on the y-axis, obviously, because it's not up here with the rest of them. And then in this instance, that's perfectly okay, because really all we're worried about is the x-axis when we're doing HRV analysis. So now that that's taken care of, again, you'll see that you just made these adjustments over here, went up here to the snap peak and mid-beat auto peak. You turn both of those off, and you mid-beated. When you do this, you'll see that the IBI channel flattens out, and then you can just come back to your main editing notes, copy and paste your mid-beat in, and we'll put that right here and center it. Okay, now if you would have more than one mid-beat in one segment, you'll always want to mark them as 2 or 3 or however many is the case. This is important because if there's more than 10% of the data or more than 10% of the R spikes that are in the segment need to be mid-beated, then you'll need to take that into account. Any more than 10% means that the segment will need to be deleted. Furthermore, you'll notice that in a process where you have to mid-beat 2 in a row, that process will not be tenable. It'll be impossible to do that because you essentially need markers on the outside, right on the outsides of where you're mid-beating. So in the case that you have to mid-beat 2 in a row, you won't be able to do that, and you'll have to consider that whole segment unusable. Okay, and that is right here. So we'll take a look at that, and I know in case 32 here, or in segment 32, we can see a perfect example of this. So when we zoom in, we see that we have natural physiological variability here, and again, we're going to ignore that, and instead we're going to zoom in on this end right here. What happened here is it looks like either there was a drop in the data or a drop in communication, or the heart just took a huge break, which could have been the case as well. Regardless, we note that the kind of normal pattern that we were observing throughout the course of the experiment was abruptly stopped, and this makes a huge difference in our RSA. As you can see down here, it's 635, and we don't know if that's necessarily the case or not. It seems to be somewhat normal, but we don't really want to take any chances, and we know that this was a huge gap that doesn't seem to be realistic. Again, so what we're going to do is come down here, we can even measure this difference here. One way to do this is simply to line up our channel, our R spike here, with the X cursor, and we can move our other one over to correspond to that X cursor as well. Typically, it's a good idea to leave at least 1 or 2 or 3 R spikes between your measurement and where it drops off. And once you get those X cursors lined up, you can come along here and measure. You see this one's just about the same. There should be another one about right there, and another one about right there, and then the next one would correspond right there. So it looks like we're missing 2 R spikes in a row. In this case, it's impossible to mid-beat 2 in a row, so we have to consider this whole segment unusable. What we'll do is we'll come back here, scroll down to unusable, copy and paste, and then just mark that. Center it. And now we know that segment is completely unusable because it would have needed 2 mid-beats in a row. And since that's impossible to do, we'll just simply ignore that from the analysis, and we can code for that later when we do our statistics. Okay, there is a couple more processes that we're going to look at. The first one is what I call a fake mid-beat. Take a look at segment 14. In this case, you see that we have all the makings of a perfect instantiation of a mid-beat. Okay, so you're going along and you have a abrupt spike in the IBI channel. So when we go ahead and take a look at this data, we see that there's actually a valid R spike here. So in this case, it looks like their heart just kind of took a break and then reset itself. That it didn't affect the IBI too much, but enough that it certainly showed up in the IBI channel. In this case, to me, it looks like the R spike is realistic. There's no reason that to seem like it's an artifact of the data or a movement artifact. So in this case, it's actually called a fake mid-beat. In other words, it's real data that there's no need for us to make up or change in any way. So we'll simply say that that's perfectly fine. It's just natural physiological variability. And in that case, we're not going to mark anything. Okay, these will come up, and oftentimes it's just a matter of you being able to properly determine when it's a fake mid-beat and when it's actually needed to make a real mid-beat or to adjust any artifact that might be there. Okay, so the last thing we're going to look at is a questionable segment. These are segments that are just too complex for a research assistant without the necessary training and experience to diagnose. In those circumstances, you'll simply want to mark that the segment's questionable so that somebody with more experience can come back and interpret that data a little bit later. So we'll take a look, and I believe it's 36 that shows this process. Okay, so here we have all of our data here. It doesn't seem to be too much of an issue. This is somewhat questionable, but it looks like all the R spikes were properly diagnosed. So we'll go ahead in here and take a look first at this data, just to make sure it's okay. Looks like we have all the valid R spikes, even though there's quite a bit of noise here. Remember, all we care about is the R spikes. So these do not seem to be interfering with that process at all. We'll go ahead and just keep moving our data over and take a look at what we got going on here. So we can see what happened basically here is that a participant was moving around, had a lot of artifact that they created by moving. Either that or it's probably the case that that's what happened here. So basically what we're trying to do is get rid of all these stars and save the segment. In some cases this will be possible, in some cases it won't. In this case I do think it's possible, having looked at this data before. However, I wouldn't necessarily know that if I was just starting to do this process. So what we're going to do is try to take care of all the easy stars first. This can be done by clicking first on F1 to delete. And in this case, it's really going to help to use the X cursors. Okay, so we'll go ahead and line these up here to the R spikes that are valid, and then try to move our data to correspond. So in this case, it looks like we have a valid R spike right there. However, when we look closer, we can actually see that that's somewhat misleading. The reason why is because we have a QRS complex here and a QRS complex here, where we can see this is much more of an artifact. It looks like something that was caused by movement or something along those lines. So in this case, I actually think it's a better idea to delete this one. You can see that the other one deleted here because it was close. What we can do to fix that is click on Snap to Peak, come over here, and mark that. come back and turn snap to peek off, and click OK. All right, so we've fixed that one issue there. Go ahead and take a closer look at the rest of the data. Okay, so we can definitely see that this is an artifact. This seems to be an artifact right here. We'll go ahead and try to delete this really quick, right there. Okay, and from there, we're going to go ahead and try to save this segment if we can. So we'll click OK, go in here and edit some more data. I had this just kind of bobbing and weaving, if you will, kind of coming in and out every time you make an adjustment. It just helps to save from making a mistake and then losing all the edits that you made. So again, what I would do is try to set up your R spike here, or your X cursors, to match the R spikes. Okay, and then move what you can here. So in this case, it looks like that could be close to an R spike. And then from there would be another R spike right about here. From there, it looks like this could be the next closest one. And then go from there. So first we'll mark this one. Delete. And then we'll try to bring it forward. And it looks like, if anything, this would be the next valid point. But even that's somewhat of a stretch. For the time being, let's just assume that it is the case. We'll go ahead and mark that. And then we'll delete these other points. Okay. And then from there would be another one right here in the middle. So again, assuming that that R spike is in fact correct, you can come in here and then you can mid-beat this. We'll press OK, and we can see that we've fixed the problem. We've saved the data segment, and there seems to be a valid series of R spikes here. This, however, is somewhat tenable, obviously. This all hinges on the fact that this R spike is valid. And although you could make that argument, I actually don't think that's a valid R spike now that I'm looking at it again. So in this case, you can try to fix it, but I would definitely mark this as questionable. And if anything, mark it as if it is unusable, then it can be deleted later. This, however, is something that has to be left up to a more experienced researcher or somebody who has more experience with this particular program and R spike data. So what I would suggest is just come in here, and if you feel like you can save it, go in here and mark it questionable, and then the comparator knows later that this segment is somewhat tenable. So if they want to try to save it, they can, and if not, then we know to get rid of it. Okay, so other things, I think those are the core concepts that you'll be dealing with while actually in the program. The other things that you want to mark in the editing notes are marking when you've completed the file, and you'll do that by clicking on this. It'll be the purple one. And you basically just come up here and mark this. If it doesn't do it automatically, you can mark it right here by highlighting completed purple and then putting your name in. This notifies that the comparator that you've completed all these you've completed this file, and that all the editing notes are corresponding to you. At the end, the researcher will come in here, and for the files that will be used, they'll be able to highlight them all either in green or in blue, and notifying that you either be able to save the file or it'll be the duplicate that's essentially thrown away. So those are all the core editing notes. If you have any questions on this, you can always contact Brandon, Emily, or Eddie, or any other lab manager that you'll be working with. Hopefully this is helpful, and again, if you have any questions, let us know.